Aimee Dawes and from Baton Rouge. And Patrick is a very happy baby. Everybody always says, is he always that happy? Is he always that happy? And because he's always smiling and laughing, and he is. He's such a blessing. He's, especially when his big brother comes in the room, I mean, he just follows him around the room, just, grinning and laughing, and he's so good. I mean, I couldn't have, everybody said after I had a good first baby, they said, oh, your next one's not going to be that way. My next one's that way. He's so happy. Well, Patrick was born at 38 weeks, and right after delivery, they knew his blood sugar was low, and so nurse went and fed him right away. They called him respiratory therapy just to make sure everything was all right, and he was okay. And then the next morning, we celebrated with family and had a great time. And the next morning, when the pediatrician came to see him, and they checked his temperature and everything before, and they noticed his temperature was really low, and it was that was a sign of infection. And so they were running some tests and everything, and starting him on medicine. And then the next day, I was trying to feed him, and I noticed he was acting really weak and that he was having a hard time, and just really, it seemed more tired than just normal baby tired. So I called the nurse in and I said, what do you think? I mean, you check him. And then he got even worse while she was in there, and she rushed him out to the transition nursery. I flew out of bed, ran down the hall after him. My husband chasing me, my son and my in-laws and my mother were in the room, and so they whisked my 3-year-old off so he wouldn't see all of this, because of course there was waterworks by this time. And immediately there was a whole team around him in that transition nursery, and I was just standing at the window just sobbing because he was so visibly sick. There was something wrong with him. He was so weak. He just wasn't responding to them. And I just thought, we've come so far. It was so hard for us to get this baby. We never thought we'd have him. And the nurse, who was obviously taking charge of all the testing and everything that was going on, I saw her tell somebody something, and they came and opened the door, and they said, you can come in. And so my husband stood back at the door, and I got, about 5 feet from his little bed while they were working on him. And I went back and found her later, and I just hugged her and thanked her, and she said, we normally don't, do that, but she said, I said, you let that mama in. She needs to be with her child. She needs to know what's going on. And while I was standing there watching while they were doing everything, another lady came from the back, and all she had was paper towels, but she handed them to me, and she just stood with me, and she put her arms around me. And it was just it was the most, I remember thinking in that moment, I thought, you don't know me, but you know that I need you to hug me right now. And so then the one who was in charge of him, Dawn, she said, okay, his blood sugar's really low, and protocol is that we have to take him to the NICU. And so I said, okay. So my husband had gone and gotten me a wheelchair and to bring me all the way down there. So my mom, my husband, and I went there, and on the ride I did what everybody does. I hurried up and called my dad. They're taking him to the NICU, and he said, I'm on my way. I'll be there in a second. And so by the time we got down there and they took us back, the neonatologist had already met with him, examined him. She already had a plan. She'd already reviewed all of his chart and everything. And she said, given everything that's going on with his low temperature, his low blood sugar, his just basic, poor tone, we need to do a spinal tap. I'm concerned with meningitis. And she said, as soon as you give me permission, we'll go ahead and do it. So I said, okay, go ahead, but I knew what that meant, And so we left and went out into the waiting room, and that was some of the most horrible waiting of my life. I was just terrified for my sweet little boy in there. And in the meantime, my dad got there, and my brother and sister-in-law were on their way. And, the troops were starting to rally and circle us. And then the nurse came out and got us. And while we were washing up to go back to the the neonatologist came out and met us, and she, told us it takes a while to get the results back, but based on the preliminary, we don't think it's meningitis. And so immediately, I mean, I felt like I could just breathe, and so she took us back so we could see him and touch him, and we couldn't hold him yet because he wasn't holding his temperature. And then, we got to talk to the nurse who was going to be his nurse that night, and turned out we have mutual friends, and so I was immediately comfortable. I felt, and she was pregnant, and I thought, okay, you know how to love a baby, you're going to love my baby tonight. And they came and met with me from lactation while we were in there in the NI, and said, you pump that breast milk and bring it down here, and we're going to give it to him, and we're going to, make sure he gets everything that he needs. And they were so supportive. And so then, since he was sick, he ended up having just a blood infection. They decided to keep, he stayed for a few days there, and then he transitioned to special care. And then he had to stay for an extra week to finish out the antibiotics. And I was technically discharged as a patient, and I was allowed to stay in the room with Patrick, my husband and I were. And that was so wonderful because the whole time we were able to learn how to take care of him with all the nurses' support and with all the doctors' support, even though I wasn't technically the patient. So we luckily had a little extended stay, but left with a beautiful, very happy Mohawk little baby. Thank goodness for technology today. And but what we did, since there's a group of us, and it was hard for me to get to the computer and to call everybody, I told Allison, one of our girls in our group, I said, okay, I'm just going to call you or email you or text you, and if you'll make sure everybody knows what's going on, because they were all so sweet. I'd get texts and emails and calls that would say, don't call me back. I just want you to know we're praying for you, and whatever you need anything, you need to do something with your other child, or needs to bring you anything. And just knowing that they were all there and that they were completely sincere that they would have done anything to help, and just knowing I had that support meant the world. I don't think I have enough time to thank everybody who touched our lives that week that we were there, down to the first day when he went into that transition nursery. And I actually went back and I saw Dawn in there, the one that was in charge of him, and I said, I just kind of waved, and she just lit up, and she came to the door, and she said, I've been thinking about you. How is the baby? How are you? And we just stood in the door and just hugged, and I just said, thank you for everything you did for me and for him. And I said, you knew what I needed that day. And I said, and who was that woman who, came up and put her arm around me? And she was like, oh, Deidre. And she's like, oh, she's been calling. She wanted to know how you were too. And I just thought, gosh, once again, she didn't know me, and yet she wants to know how I'm doing. And so she said, well, can I tell her where you are? And I said, oh, yeah. And I gave her my room number. And over the next few days, both of them came, or about an hour later, she called me in the room. The other nurse did. She called, and she was like, oh, Dawn told me I could call you. How are you? And I just thought, golly. She was calling me from her cell phone. She wasn't even at work. And she said, I'm going to be in work tomorrow. Can I come see you and the baby? And so both of them came by. The nurse who was my nurse when I had my first child came to see me in the hospital when I was hospitalized a few weeks prior for contractions and threatening early delivery. She came to visit me then. She also came back to visit me several times. They'd all come on their breaks or on their lunch or before they started. And even one day I was so upset over something that was going on, some results that were questionable that we had gotten back about Patrick, and I was sitting in the room and I was just crying. And in walks one of the lactation consultants, and she said, okay, I think you need some skin-to-skin time. And she turned off the lights, and she said, go sit in the chair. And so she went and got Patrick. She unbundled him, and she brought him over to me, and she laid him up on my chest. And we had a blanket that we brought from home, and so she wrapped it around both of us. And she said, this is what both of you need right now. And it was just, it was so caring, and she didn't have to do that, but she saw, I was so scared, and I just needed to be close to my child, and just things like that. And I even kept a list of all these people's names. One of the nurse's aides, she kept coming back, and I just, even one night I'm like, oh, you got your hair cut. And it's like I felt like we were friends after that, and I just wanted to, I wish so bad I could just walk around the hospital now looking for all of them, because when they'd be working on different floors, somebody'd say, oh, your nurse from last night called to make sure y'all were okay, and she said she's going to come down on her break. Is that okay? And I'm like, oh, please, tell her to come visit. And they just all come sit on the edge of the bed and just, so how's he doing today? Oh, he looks so much better, and they were all just so interested. And even the lady who would come in every day to change my sheets and make my bed, and I remember one day I was sitting in the chair holding Patrick, and she came in and she said, how you doing today? And I said, I'm better. And I said, I feel like you're my mom when my mom isn't here. And I said, it's just something so comfortable about having, all new sheets and your bed all made. And she said, I'm going to take care of you, baby. And she meant it. She cared that much. And it just meant so much to me in those times where you needed all the mothering you could get, because I was a scared mother. And I needed as much love and support as I could get. And I had it from my family, but all these other people who didn't know me previously wanted to take care of me. And it meant so much. I will absolutely, without a doubt, have any other children I have at Woman's. Absolutely.